Yes, yes, yes. Gator is in the chat already, which we love. He was hella early. We appreciate you, man. Thanks for tuning in. Holy crap. I didn't know if we were going to get this one in, but we got it in before the season kicked off. This is the Full Tilt Dynasty Podcast Network. This is episode 151. And to say that there's a lot happening right now would be an absolutely horrific understatement. So I don't want to take too much time. I, of course, am joined by my regular co-hosts here. We've got Jakob, FF_RTDP. We got Big Billy, FF. You can find me at Thomas Tipple, FF on the Bird app. But today, it was episode 113. You joined us last time, Scott, and since then, lots have changed, and we're going to discuss some of that. You are a busy man. We thank you. Just absolutely excited. Loved your last article, man. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I had a blast last time, so great to be back.
Love that. Jakob, you've been on the Twitter streets all day updating depth charts.
One day, man. This is the day of my dreams, man. Like everybody else cares about, round 1 running backs, round 2 running backs. All I care about is your round 27 dynasty picks, and which running backs are making 53s. So I've been in my element all day out here, just grinding. Which round 7 and UDFA players are still on life support. It's a lovely day to be alive. Correct.
Definitely. I also appreciated your comment on the Ravens not giving a shit about our running back model.
The Ravens don't this is like my take on the Ravens is that this is like the nerds owning themselves, where the Ravens, because they're the most woke franchise in the NFL, they've realized that like running back doesn't matter. And then this is like the children of the forest creating the White Walkers, where like then all of the nerds that whine about running backs not mattering are then mad when the Ravens cut their like fun, talented young running backs to play old dusty dudes because they don't know that running back doesn't matter. So they're just playing these dusty dudes they think aren't going to fuck up the rest of their offense. And it owns us. It owns the nerds.
We get a new version of Latavius Murray and Devonta Freeman in this year's Mike Davis, Kenyon Drake.
Revolving door.
Billy, you had mentioned that it might be time to start being concerned about the New England draft process. Asiasi and Keene both yeeted from the roster already in one of the worst set of drafting decisions I've ever seen be made. I agree with you, man. Absolutely horrific. I was just going to say, Billy, there's been a ton of cuts today, and we will have a ton of time to get into that. But we have, for once here on the program, a little bit of a time crunch. We can't be going, Scott, last time you were here, we loved it. We had to release it in 2 parts. We just could not get enough of the convo and the information, and I loved it. But I want to get to what brought us here today. That is, we talked about it before. Your My Guys for 2022 article is up. It is live on Fantasy Points. You should be subscribing to Fantasy Points to get all of the information. I just want to hit a couple of points and then give Jakob and Billy their opportunity to let the people know who their 2022 My Guys are. Who is it going to be this year? When you started writing the article, Scott, who was the first player that came to mind that you had to get pen to paper, or I guess a keyboard to screen now?
I don't know. That's a pretty good question. It kind of happens more organically than that, where there's guys I like as values, and then I'll write them up. And sometimes just with that write-up, like I really just sway myself. And that was exactly the case with Justin Fields,
right?
Where I thought, Trey Lance was going to be my guy. I just kept writing it, and I let it marinate. And it really, really swayed me where, at value, at ADP, I like Justin Fields considerably more. And then I guess at the other positions, like Kamara was just always standing out. His ADP's finally budged a little bit, but he was going like late round 2 on Yahoo. He might still be going late round 2 on Yahoo. And it just seemed like no one really adjusted for that injury risk. Maybe this is like really stupid and Mark Ingram's going to be far more involved than anyone wants, but that's my RB3.
Right.
Toronto Dave said Amon-Ra St. Brown. That's definitely one of my guys. Love him this year. But yeah, like I'm dangerously high on. I just like that's not a hot take. I just think he's the RB3, and so like it's so rare to be able to get. And we were getting like round 3 Alvin Kamara like, from my top 3 running back, just like such a rare value that only comes around.
Remember that
once every
time,
2 years.
like that brief time in our lives where we could draft McCaffrey, Barkley, and Kamara on the same team?
Special times.
Right.
That was like one of the best times we've ever had in life. Like if you drew the 1-1 or 1-2, like you could reliably draft McCaffrey, Barkley, Kamara on the same team, and then draft no other running backs for the entire rest of your draft, and you're golden. That was like I've couple those.
I'm going to be telling my grandkids one day about the time I was on Underdog and drafted those 3 running backs.
It's I can't believe like those are the most, to me, some of the most panic inducing ones too, because it could be like a stub toe, a Jameis Winston game, and then a Christian McCaffrey got the ball 35 times too many, and that's it. So
yeah, and then it's
panic
an absolute disaster. Where I told you he was injury prone, and it's
I mean those.
Love it.
I just remember like looking at that one day, and I just like kind of realized I was like, wow, like there's like a very realistic possibility that I could be drafting like the RB1, RB2, and RB3, like in not even just like flukily, but like in expected fantasy points on the same team. Like that's like actually a possibility. And all that fade comes down to, you know, suspension risk and injury risk and et cetera. But like at the ceiling in a tournament for $1 million, it's like, how can you not, you know,
you have to,
opportunity.
When we had discussed Justin Fields, I had mentioned that I was concerned. The offense isn't very good, and he doesn't really have a lot. Billy's a fake Packers fan, as he loves like every Chicago Bears wide receiver ever. I think Darnell Mooney's like a kind of like a fake alpha, but how does he not have X amount of targets? You know what I mean? So just bypassing all that, just basing it rushing only, you think he's still that elite option? Because this is the one when you and I were discussing that we like probably differed the most on. So I've come around, but is it just purely based on the rushing and the offense just doesn't have to be very good?
Yeah, so it's a few things. I have a really good track record on quarterbacks from, you know, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, all highest owned quarterbacks. And in every instance, it was a pretty mobile sophomore quarterback. And I'm just seeing a lot of similarities between Trey Lance in sophomore season, Patrick Mahomes, and Justin Fields in sophomore season, Lamar Jackson. And a key reason why I was so high on Lamar Jackson was because Greg Roman was coming in. He has this ridiculous history with hypermobile quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. The entire offense is going to be different. When the year prior, it was an offense designed around Joe Flacco, which like clearly doesn't suit his skill set at all. And now, I mean, Nagy, like one of the biggest donkeys in the NFL. Justin Fields' best game last year was the one game Nagy missed due to COVID. He scored 25 fantasy points. And so what you're seeing this year is everything you want to see. It's very RPO heavy, a lot of deep shots. You could say like Kmet and Mooney is very similar to Mark Andrews and Hollywood Brown. But I think the biggest thing is
to Mark Andrews.
No, of course. No, I totally, but I just mean like a deep threat and a tight end. Yeah, no, insanely, yes. But it's his big flaw coming out of college, supposedly by my PFF buddies, was he couldn't work through his progressions. And all preseason, you've seen a lot of one read throws, and he's PFF's highest graded quarterback this preseason. And I wrote this up before the preseason, mind you. But basically, it boils down to this. Like, we know massive Konami code upside, top 3 all-time in 40-yard dash, speed score, hyper-productive, prolific runner in college. And he, like, really – his numbers look horrible. But if you, like, his last 6 healthy games, he averaged 8 carries per game, 56 rushing yards per game. His last 3 full healthy games, he averaged 267 passing yards per game. All of those numbers were better than Josh Allen last year. Like, that's just crazy to think about. But what it boils down to is like I understand all of the concerns. Everything hinges on how much he runs. It's like, okay, his receiving core sucks. It sucks. Doesn't matter if he runs a lot. Okay, he has the worst offensive line in football. You're dead right. Doesn't matter if he runs a lot. Pressures per dropback doesn't correlate at all to fantasy points with Konami code quarterbacks. Zero correlation. It does, like, it's massive for Tom Brady and guys like that. So it all hinges on whether or not he runs a lot. And then you look at his ADP, his QB 25, he's round 16. And so there's zero risk. It's all upside from there. Mm-hmm. And so I usually, screw drafting a QB2, but I'm drafting Fields every time as my QB2. And the big thing with this is it gives way more credence to a late round quarterback approach, which is the optimal strategy in a vacuum. Now it's like, okay, you could draft Trey Lance, you can draft, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Matthew Stafford, Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, whatever, who gives a fuck. But you have this player with league-winning QB1 upside who's like basically free. So, yeah, I really like Fields.
As I'm getting more into managed season, I'm warming to the idea of Fields a little bit. I struggle with him in best ball in the sense that, like, I'm looking in these tournaments for these like weekly massive ceilings, and Fields, it's like weird to say because he's this young rushing quarterback, but he almost feels more like a floor play to me in the sense that his rushing is like a really, really high floor building exercise, to be honest. And his ceiling, I think, at a season-long perspective is pretty high. I'm not quite as convinced how high his ceiling is weekly. If I'm trying to capture in like a best ball tournament, trying to make sure I have the QB1 in a given week to win my pool, to win the week, I'm just not super sure that the Bears offense is enough of a vehicle to be able to give me that like 35-point spike, that 30-point spike. I remember a lot of the Jalen Hurts performances last year where he was like very, very consistently above 20, not super often putting those massive, massive spikes. And he was like continually living in this QB5 to QB10 zone. To me, that's a little bit more of what Fields' upside case looks like. In a managed scenario, if you're able to get a Jalen Hurts-esque season and you're able to get that coming, as one of the last quarterbacks drafted, that's just a massive, massive win. And I love that. I've struggled with him a little bit more in best ball formats for that reason. But if he certainly does it, he can still pay off as a big value. It is hard for me to get past the offense. I also look at Fields like from a market share receiving yard or market share rushing yards perspective in college. It was good. I believe he was at 18%. That's solid. It's a rushing quarterback, but it's not quite like in the Lamar Jackson, even the Deshaun Watson, even the Trey Lance zone, where I think he's a little bit of a step below where those guys were as a college rushing profile. I don't necessarily think that's because he can't run or something. It's just his proclivity to run wasn't quite as high. So I would struggle to see that like Lamar Jackson level rushing up. Yeah, well, I think he's going to be more in like the, I don't know, like maybe more like a young Russell Wilson rushing upside.
Yeah, well, his best rushing season wasn't quite Kyler Murray, but it wasn't too far off, wasn't Trey Lance. And so there is a bit of a projection there where you're just looking at, he had the third best 40-yard dash time ever, the third best speed score ever with only Cam Newton and Michael Vick coming in ahead of him. And so like I said, everything hinges on, does he run a lot? He didn't run at all in preseason, but that's not too uncommon. Trying to preserve him, things like that. I like what you said about best ball, though. I do think he's a strong ADP beater, so he's still a pretty good pick in best ball. But I was telling Thomas before the show, I really lean all in on the various formats where start sit. I'm very much season-long upside oriented. And with Konami code quarterbacks, they do have the highest, typically weekly ceiling, but really you want that high floor and predictability where they're just easy start every single week. But in like Underdog, I released this massive Underdog draft strategy guide, and I gave my top picks. Far and away, my highest owned quarterback is Kyler Murray, and I think that is
my highest owned as well in Underdog.
Well, so you get it.
And an FFPC. In fact, totally by accident, but I currently have 100% Kyler exposure on my 3 FFPC drafts. I did it the first 2 intentionally. The second one, I didn't. The second one, I forewent Kyler Murray in round 7. I planned to take Lance for a stack at the 809. Lance goes off the board. Kyler is still on the board. I was like, well, I'm going to take Kyler.
Yeah. So in underdog tournaments, you really want that 30 plus fantasy point weekly upside for the bonus rounds. And like, he has arguably the highest weekly ceiling of any quarterback, as crazy as that sounds, but that's what we've seen when he's healthy.
Yeah, I think if we're going to see the Bears replicate, anything close to what they did just last year, but even taking a step forward, a lot of that is going to fall on Justin Fields' ability to create time. And a lot of times that ends up correlating directly towards a lot more rushing in the field. Like, yeah, they're exactly what Toronto Dave there is saying. His proclivity to have to get away from some 280-pound defensive end that pushed Tevin Jenkins into the dirt is going to make him have to pick up just a few extra yards just to be able to like continue to make money. Like that feels like what needs to be able to happen, because Darnell Mooney, Thomas said it, he probably isn't the alpha that I know I want him to be, but I think he's a good wide receiver. And maybe he's not going to be that guy that can get wide open against any cornerback in the league. But I think Justin Fields has that ability to create time where these receivers who, let's be honest, one of the worst receiving cores in the league, is going to be able to kind of create that time and allow them to get open downfield. So I think if there's any chance here, I think it's going to fall on Justin Fields producing above his ADP.
So last thing before we move on from Justin Fields, I'm going to get a my guy from both Jakob and Billy, and then Scott. If you want to share one more tidbit from the article, it's all up to you, and we can move on afterwards. I just want to mention, after we talked about Justin Fields, there's a player I went looking at for a comp, especially at their ADP, and Tyrod Taylor kind of rings. Even if you look at Tyrod Taylor's, let's say 2015 season where he had 14 games played and he was the QB 7 in points per game, he still only rushed for 568 yards. He barely threw for 3,000 yards, and he only hit 20 passing touchdowns. I think that's a very, very doable season for Justin Fields this year. So that's where I went. But Billy, I want to get one my guy from you for 2022 before we get to Jacob's.
Yeah, I wanted to go a little bit deeper here. There's a lot of wide receivers that I absolutely love that I would gladly hitch my wagon to. Pittman, Hollywood, all those guys would love to be able to jump onto. Lazard as well, I think I'm coming around on him potentially producing well for the Packers.
Jacob doesn't like it. Jacob doesn't like it. He's turning colors.
My tongue is being bit. It's all good.
Yeah. So I jumped down a little bit deeper here at wide receiver. I took the rookie. I'm taking George Pickens as my guy this year. I think there is a legitimate chance he's out targeting Chase Claypool this year. And I think he's the wide receiver too in this offense that's only going to get better. Like they signed Deontay. They need this wide receiving core to stay kind of cheaper if they're going to continue to shell out contracts to these other big players they have on their team. I think the team is ready to build around having George Pickens as the wide receiver too, and I think they're going to establish that this year with him kind of showing out a little bit in camp, playing well in preseason games, and hopefully doing just as well once the regular season starts.
No, I vibe with that. Especially at cost, right? Like he's still one of the cheaper first round rookies that you can draft, and now with Pierce going absolutely astronomical, he's gonna slip the second round. Like it's kind of insane.
Real quick, I do want to talk about that draft I had this week where the draft went so 101 to 106. I drafted at 106. Breece Hall, Ken Walker, Damian Pierce, James Cook, Chris Olave, Drake London. So
that's insanity.
Some hype trains are getting a little bit out of control here.
Our home league, we had a guy trade up to the 103 and drafted Pierce. Like I was
there for that. I watched it happen.
Absolutely lunacy. Jacob, you're my guy for 2022. You're hell bent on, and it can't be Keontae Ingram.
It's not, but I'm very happy that he's employed by an NFL franchise. Go get it, buddy. My guy in managed leagues in particular this year is Rachaad White, and that's Tampa Bay Buccaneers backfield. I'm also in on Leonard Fournette, to be clear. I've seen like a lot of people that are out on Fournette and in on White, or they're in on Fournette and they're kind of bashing White. I'm in on a backfield that had 27.7 expected fantasy points per game last year in PPR. People talk about Tony Pollard, and I mean, I would be first among them to cite him as the highest upside backup running back in the game. Dallas had over 23 expected fantasy points per game last year. That's awesome. Tampa Bay crushed that by essentially a passing touchdown with up near 28 expected fantasy points per game. They were by a solid margin the number one team in high value touches. That's receiving and then touches inside the 10-yard line to running back position. And there's even more uncertainty than there was last year, certainly with the receiving core, with Russell Gage battling an injury, Julio Jones battling seniority, Chris Godwin battling his way back from an injury. And so I think there's going to continue to be a ton of fantasy points in this backfield. Rachaad White has seemingly already worked his way even or ahead of Keyshawn Vaughn, who's been a disappointment so far in Tampa Bay, and had the exact profile we want to see for a fantasy valuable running back coming out of college. He has the size. He had an 18% target share in his final year in college. That's absolutely phenomenal. And he comes into this super fantasy-friendly gold mine, particularly for receiving backs. I think even early in the season with Leonard Fournette capturing the high-value touches that we want, why I think he's an absolute smash at the 2-3 turn, White's potentially going to be working in between the 20s. He's still going to be seeing receiving work of his own. And if Leonard Fournette was to go down with injury, which would not at all be surprising for a running back who's faced several injuries and he's 27 years old, I truly think that Rachaad White could contend to be a top 5 running back for however long Leonard Fournette is out if he's able to control goal line touches and the passing down situations, which I think is at least quite possible based on his profile. So if I'm in a managed league, especially where I don't have to worry about drafting point accumulators in round 8 and round 9, where guys like a Robert Woods or a Tyler Lockett or a running back, a Damian Harris or a Rashad Penny, where I'm not that worried about what my week 1 lineup looks like because I've already drafted those positions where I can get guys later, I would much rather forego those week 1 starter RB2s to grab Rachaad White in round 8 or round 9 in a managed format, and then take on guys later like a Nyheim Hines or a Michael Carter who can fill that RB2 role if that's what I need in my build. But I want to make sure that I have that upside of White because you're going to have a lot harder time finding that, I think, later in the draft, given the prospect profile he is and given the offense that he's
Can I comment on both of these?
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
Brought you on the show for that.
Are you reading off something, Jacob?
No.
That was very crispy. Forego, contend. That was very nice word choice. I wish I sounded as smart on podcasts as I did in articles. Yeah. So I love Rachaad White. That was really one of my guys in the pre-draft process. And I've been saying if the Buccaneers didn't draft Rachaad White, who they loved, they thought was the best player available by far. I thought the same. If they'd never drafted him, I'd be taking Leonard Fournette top 5 right now.
Yeah.
Because the value of that role is so immense. Over his last 4 games, 30.3 fantasy points per game. Last 6 games, 25.3. Last 11, 22.2. Last 18 games, 20 fantasy points per game. So that's somewhere in between last season Austin Eckler, 2019 Christian McCaffrey. Just and the target volume just right on par with Christian McCaffrey. But here's a sources thing. They want Rachaad White heavily involved somewhere around the halfway point. They want, maybe 10 touches per game, something similar to Tony Pollard when Zeke is fully healthy. And yeah, the upside is massive. I really worry about that offensive line in Tampa. I think you're going to see Tom Brady check it down like he did with James White back in the day. And like I said, I love this kid's talent. I think he's awesome. And so does Tampa Bay. George Pickens, the other one. Yeah, I would bet $100,000 he's going to outscore Chase Claypool. I was honestly surprised Chase Claypool didn't get traded. I think he's immediately the clear wide receiver too, but here's where I'm going to throw it back to you guys. I have George Pickens as a must draft. But my only question is, and Deontay Johnson has long been one of my guys. He just gets open. That's all he does.
Great.
He either gets open or he gets hurt or he scores 12 plus fantasy points in every
Gets
single
open,
game.
gets hurt, or gets benched for dropping the ball. Those are the three
Well,
options.
one time.
I love Deontay Johnson. I'm not fighting with you.
He got benched one time. He got hurt 5 times, and then every other time he saw double-digit targets. and so the narrative on him is just, listen, this was Big Ben's guy, so now we don't know what is going to happen. But like, I see it a different way. I see it like, hey, Ben Roethlisberger was far and away the worst quarterback on football, on par with Zach Wilson last year.
Yes.
There's a chance that he's just the new Devontae Adams. Like, that's sacrilege, but something along those lines.
I agree.
Where get him competent quarterback play, and he just explodes. He takes the league by storm. And so, like, I don't know the answer to this question. I think George Pickens, Greg Cosell was telling me all offseason, this is the best wide receiver in the class. He's going to fall due to off the field concerns, but this is AJ Green 2.0. And so my question to you is where are you guys at on Deontay as a talent?
I'm way in on Deontay for sure. I just think he's an elite receiver in the National Football League who isn't priced like it.
Right.
It's not just the stats. Like, it's one thing to say he's a great fantasy guy, but we have ways that we can measure, at least to some extent, and draw inferences whether someone is only fantasy friendly and they're getting fed like fraudulent volume or whatever. Like, every single route in the tree that Matt Harmon has charted, he like lights up like a Christmas tree in green. So I don't have any particular concerns about like Deontay Johnson's ability to run the full route tree. I think that he was by far their best wide receiver. And then they had a quarterback who could only throw freaking slants and curls. It's the same argument that I was making for Michael Thomas before his like injury submarined his entire career. But like, when you have an aging quarterback who can only throw short areas, you're probably going to scheme your best wide receiver to run a lot of those routes so that they can function in the offense. But we have not seen evidence that Deontay can't be effective deep. He was an effective target earner all the way throughout college, and he was doing that on a more higher ADOT role than he's been used on in the NFL. So I think Deontay is just a stud. I don't really want to let a rookie who I think is probably really good detract me from drafting someone who I just think is a stud superstar wide receiver in the NFL. So I'm still drafting Deontay Johnson. I'm probably not drafting as much Pickens as you guys are, but I'm certainly open-minded to him. But I just don't want anything to get in the way of me drafting Deontay Johnson at like what a really affordable cost. Like, he's going at like the late 4, early 5.
The narrative is that, he just got by on volume and he's like a volume, but like,
that's receiver
with the wide receiver
volume.
Targets are earned. They're indicative of a surplus of talent. And so like, I keep trying to go with that narrative. It's just like, no, I think he's just really sick at football.
The Steelers for fantasy feel like an iceberg. Like, we can look up here and kind of get surface level information. And then like the more narratives you add on, the more like arcing branches that come out. Deontay Johnson to me feels a lot like the inverse Najee Harris. Whereas like Najee, I think he is completely predicated on volume. He had so many opportunities this last year, 300 rush attempts, 90 targets, all this opportunity, and just inefficiency was not good. Or I guess efficiency was not good. Double negative there. And I think we're kind of running into this situation where as that goes down, I don't think Najee is going to become more efficient to offset that loss in volume, which is why I've been saying all offseason, I think we saw Najee's ceiling last year. And Deontay, I think, is the exact opposite. I think he may see a drop in targets. He may see something similar to that. But the last couple of years, he's hitting 7-8 touchdowns, but he's still, with all these targets, barely breaking over 1,000 yards. This last year he hit 1,150. But like, I think there's so much opportunity here for him to break into that upper echelon of yardage guys, like push into that 1,400, be one of those guys that are pushing for double-digit touchdowns because he's just that good. He's so good at catching separation. And now with a quarterback that is able to actually rocket the ball, unlike Ben, who had to throw ducks 5 yards away from the line, like it
hurt to watch.
If we have a quarterback that can put some miles per hour on the ball, like Deontay has every opportunity to take that like elite next step, which feels crazy Because in 2020, it felt like we said the same thing. We're like, and he did. He jumped up to a top 8 wide receiver.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels like he has that, like, still that next gear in his ceiling. I think there's a lot of good coming for Deontay. And this is why I said all offseason, the quarterback that goes to Pittsburgh is going to be my guy for the foreseeable future. I don't care if it was Pickett, if it was Ritter, if it was Willis. I mean, look at the situation now. But, like, I am so excited for Kenny Pickett because there's so much pass-catching talent on this team. Not even to mention Calvin Austin.
I don't think we need to mention Calvin.
We're good.
I said that just to see, like, a little bit more of the whites of Jacob's eyes.
I firmly have Deontay Johnson as a top 12 receiver in pretty much every format you could possibly have. I love him. I've joined the group. I was outside. I was a hater, but I've turned it around. I've turned around. And look, real quick before we move on, I will say I have mentioned this on the Fantasy Walkabout, which is on Saturdays at the Full Tilt Dynasty Podcast Network. Michael Pittman is my guy for 2022. I think what you expected from Calvin Ridley, you can expect from Michael Pittman. That's why you can at me about it. I'd love to have a great conversation about it, but not here and not now. Look, we have a question here.
That's cheating.
No, I know it is. But
Christian McCaffrey is my guy this year.
Well, that's why I push all the buttons. I am the commander in chief here, and we are in a time crunch. I can blame it on that. I have a question that I want to get to from Danny that he had put here. He said it was a little off topic, but I feel bad we haven't gotten to it yet. Here's the question. This is for Jacob. Hey, I know this is off topic question for Jacob. Oh, there you go. About stacking. I love his Robert Frost analogy about
from
stacking.
2021 being brought up on the show. Let's go.
What's the Robert Frost analogy?
Well, so I did an article on this here.
Can I finish the question so I can pull it down?
Yes.
Okay. I love his Robert Frost analogy about stacking. Is about lowering the correct assumptions you need to make, but then what are the downsides of stacking, and does stacking not increase upside at all? ? I'm just trying to fully understand this concept. Thank you.
Is this a basketball thing?
Yes, but like I would apply it to any sort of managed tournament, really. I don't care about as much in like a standard redraft league, but
first, what was the reference?
Yeah, so basically this came from my piece or from my series last year that I did on differences between best ball tournaments and DFS tournaments and lessons that we can apply from DFS tournaments to best ball and as sort of others that we should modify. And I recently cited this in my last best ball strategy guide, so I'm happy that we have a reader. But I use this analogy of, I forget the details to be entirely honest, but essentially there is 2 paths that you can go by, hence the Robert Frost. And essentially in one scenario, there's a set of lights that's random. There's 4 sets of lights and each one is random. And you arrive at one set of lights. You don't know necessarily if it's going to be red or green. And then you keep going to the next set of lights. And then the other side, whatever you end up on at the first, either it's going to be red or it's going to be green. That's what each of the lights thereafter is also going to be when you arrive at the light. So there you have the correlated set of lights and the uncorrelated set of lights. And essentially I went through this of like, okay, if you have X amount of time to get to the destination, which would you choose? And if you have X amount of time to get to the next destination, which would you choose? And essentially what I was pointing out was that the best path to choose for the lowest amount of time, if that's what you're focusing on, would be the correlated set of lights, because it's the only option that you have where all of the light switches can be green every single time that you get there. And so you're able to fly through the path and you're able to get there in the fastest amount of time. And so often I think when people talk about stacking, they talk about it as, oh, it creates a higher ceiling. I don't necessarily think that it creates a higher ceiling. What it does is it reduces the number of correct assumptions that you have to make to reach a ceiling. Because if you draft Patrick Mahomes and you draft Tyreek Hill, instead of having to be independently right twice, you're more likely to be right on both by making sort of one play on one offense. And so I think in seasonal, like it really depends. And I think the question was, are there downsides and does it limit upside or does it create more upside? And I guess what I would say is in like a tournament format, the downsides don't matter because like what matters is the outcome in which you win. So the downside is that it might make your 6th place roster a 9th place roster. But then all that does is like you then have a roster that wouldn't have advanced, and now it's a roster that misses advancing by more. So that doesn't actually really matter.
Right.
Because the same way it reduces the number of assumptions that you have to make in a negative direction. But you're optimizing for a top end outcome, not a bottom or not a middle outcome. And then the last point I would make in terms of does it increase your upside? Again, functionally, yes, it's a ceiling strategy. It doesn't make your upside higher. It's just that would you be more likely to make 9 bets individually correct or make 3 bets individually correct?
Right.
It's a lot easier to make 3 bets individually correct. So yes, your ceiling is technically the same, but it's just a lot easier to get there when you're stacking. I think in seasonal leagues, stacking to me makes the most sense on teams that the market might be undervaluing. So like stacking the Chiefs is fine. You get some extra weekly upside out of that. But everybody's already pricing into the Chiefs that they're going to be good. The Bills, if you draft Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen, like it's fully priced in that they're going to be really good. So you're not getting a ton of extra season-long benefit there. But I would consider stacking like offenses that the market thinks are crappy in seasonal leagues, because that's where you can actually compound the benefit of a positive assumption. So like if you're like Scott and you're on Justin Fields, by all means, add in a Cole Kmet or a Darnell Mooney. If you believe in Trevor Lawrence and you want to stack him with Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram, like when you're going at these more ambiguous offenses, that's where you can compound a bet and be right on multiple players. I don't think as much with the top teams that you're getting a season-long benefit as much as it's a weekly benefit. I
mean, I wish we had underdog draft results in 2018. Like, didn't every single like top 100 team have Mahomes, Tyreek, Kelsey, Kareem Hunt?
Yeah.
It seems conceivable to me. And then like when you talk week 17, I always like come back to that one game where the Giants played the Saints in like 2015 and it went to overtime, and 10 of the top 15 highest scorers from that week were all in that game, where that just like absolutely destroys everyone else.
Yeah. No, I love it.
If anyone wants more info on stacking and stuff, the cute Hertz, who's in the chat, Lucas, he did a ton of data polling from the 2021 season, and I put a lot of that into my last piece that you can find. It's pinned for me on Twitter. We talked about specific stacks of like how often were top 6 quarterbacks creating wide receiver ones in the same week, how often was the QB one, how often were there 2 teammates in an optimal lineup in the same week, how often were 2 teammates and a player from the opposing team in an optimal lineup in the same week. All that stuff we went through in the latest article.
Absolutely love our team. Love that work by Lucas. Our team is phenomenal. Billy, before we move on.
Real quick. There's a reason when you go into like the sleeper squads. I don't know how many people actually use sleeper squads, but it's pretty much a parlay system that Sleeper offers. There's a reason why picking players from the same like game offers you less money than picking multiple players from various different games, because it reduces the amount of things you have to be correct about. Like as Jacob was saying, if you think the Bears are going to be good, then a Justin Fields, Darnell Mooney stack is probably better than a Justin Fields and Elijah Moore stack.
Right.
Like,
correct.
It's like picking a lock, it just gives you more outs, where it's like in DFS in a given week, you're like, I think the Patriots steamroll the Jaguars, and I think the highest scoring game of the week is Minnesota Green Bay. You just stack up all those receivers, you play Damian Harris and Patriots defense, and now you only have to get 5 things right or 4 things right instead of 9 things right.
Right. I love that. We have a couple more questions. We'll get to that quick. When we come back, look, Scott, the last time you were here, the rookie wide receiver discussion went long, as they say in TV and radio, and we absolutely loved it. When you had reached out to me, you had mentioned you came up a little bit on Sky Moore, and I thought it was a little bit higher. You kind of had me in the first half in that conversation, so I can't wait to get that down with you. Look, we're going to take a quick second. When we come back, we're getting into that. We're going to answer your questions right here. Keep it locked in. Full tilt. Thanks for joining us. Sit tight. Okay.
Yeah, you used a shorter commercial.
Yes, I did. I hit the wrong button. That's okay. That happens from time to time. It's not always perfect and smooth, but the cutout there prior to that, perfect. Look, Lucas wants to know Deontay or Pittman. I'm Deontay. Who's up for everyone else?
I'll take Pittman.
You're not Deontay.
Deontay over Michael Pittman Jr.
I will take Michael Pittman Jr.
Yeah, I am assuming this is a dynasty take, in which case I will take Deontay Johnson.
I will take Pittman and either.
But I thought Pittman was your guy. I'd take Pittman.
Right.
I love
So
Deontay.
look, my dynasty brain wants Deontay, but for this year, my guy that I'm going hard on is Michael Pittman.
Okay, I'll put this to you though. If one player is younger and you think they're going to do better this year, why would you not want that player in dynasty?
I'll take Pittman too.
Price.
Yeah, but I mean, if Pittman outscores Deontay, Deontay is going to be cheaper next year.
I mean, if people want to get irrational, sure. I want Deontay in dynasty, but I want Pittman. Like, that's my dude this year.
I want Pittman in both formats because I want Pittman ahead of redraft. He's younger than Deontay. If he outscores Deontay, then he'll be worth more in dynasty.
I find that interesting from you, honestly.
Scott was saying, what if Deontay is the next like Devontae Adams? Pittman feels like he has that same opportunity coming in with Matt Ryan, and he's 2 years younger.
Pittman has had at least one fantasy wide receiver one in every year of his career, except for last year. Pittman's going to go absolutely. I keep coming back to this. I always watch post-draft pressers, and I watched an interview with the area scout who scouted Pittman. He was like, bruh, I was at every single practice, and I never saw Pittman lose a single rep against a cornerback. Like, he was so shook, and he was just like, this guy is a freak. I love Pittman, love the opportunity, etc.
Give me 1 second.
Never lost a rep. Come on.
Never lost a rep.
It's been quoted that he does have that dog in him. We have another one, Evan Ingram or Albert O. I think this one's more directed at Jakob. These are both of your guys.
Yeah, I'd prefer Ingram in a tight end premium managed. I would prefer Albert O in best ball.
Oh.
He had to get the best ball. Anyone have any other varying opinions?
I never know what format these questions
are.
I know Lucas
even
doesn't
though
give.
he buzzed his head, he feels less like he. I don't know. That felt like a cut. That was like Sky Moore becoming 24 for his number.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, 100%. All right, look. Rookie rankings. It is the end of summer. We are rolling into the fall. This is it. We've seen what we've needed to see from rookies in the NFL at this point. This is your final opportunities to plant flags and get it moving before everything kicks off, because we all know in the first couple of weeks, we'll know who was right and who was a donkey, right? That's all it takes for rookies. You get a couple weeks, so this is your chance. This is after the preseason. Scott, I want to ask your biggest mover of the rookies so far. Who do you got? The biggest mover you can think of.
I don't know. I nailed everything perfect on this show and in my article. I had projected perfectly in line with draft capital. Like, the only guys I missed on was I was too high on Sky Moore, who was the 14th wide receiver drafted. So this is the same
debate. Like, who cares? Why does it matter that you are in line with draft capital if the players suck?
I mean, I just nailed it perfect. Is that not the most predictive metric? Is it not draft capital? And everything was perfect. It was just perfectly in line. I
mean, I can read about. I'm good at predicting how they're going to be drafted. I would just never rank them that way.
I mean, that's not why I went into it ranking, but I'm just saying it's settled. We don't have to see them play their careers because I hit draft capital.
Are you getting Tyquan Thornton's Hall of Fame jacket ready?
No, that's hell yeah. Fastest wide receiver ever, but unusually thin wrist, so he goes day 3. That was the whole Tyquan.
Apparently thin collarbones.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Oh no.
Yeah. I want to rehash the Sky Moore debate because again, I was higher on him than the NFL apparently was, but I did think I was wrong on a he was one spot above Alec Pierce. I think that was dumb, even though he went behind him. I had Christian Watson ahead, like looking back on it. I really think I did just like nitpick him because he had a bunch of Elijah Moore comps and that's my guy forever. So I just like refused to I just nitpicked him to death. But like the whole debate between me and Jakob centered around, I felt like early declare status, which I don't know that I did a good job of expressing it on the last show, but I just view that as a proxy for draft capital. Guys only declare if they're likely to get day 2 draft capital. And then you're going to miss on Devonta Smith, Chris Olave, who had round 2 grades, but he stayed in school that extra year. And then beyond that, it's saying avoid 1-year wonders because the NFL stupidly loves those guys, but they always miss on 1-year wonders. And so I felt like your whole argument centered around early declare status, which is a proxy of draft capital, but now we got draft capital and it was bad. But
well, I don't think it was bad at all. He went round 2.
I mean, it was round 2, but he went after 12 guys. He went after Wan'Dale Robinson, Tyquan Thornton, Alec Pierce, Christian behind Christian Watson.
In the slightest.
And Kansas City traded down. They risked losing him. But no, I think he's good.
Personally, I just don't really care the order that they go in, to be all that honest. I
that's
haven't
a legit
ever seen
debate.
Much. So it's sort of the thing where I know inherently that it should probably matter what order they go in. But whenever I've seen, now I haven't dug into a lot of myself, but I've seen other people that have produced some of this, and it doesn't seem like it actually has that much of a bearing between where folks go once you actually isolate for the other stuff in a production profile. And I guess this guy, he got round 2 draft capital. He has all the other things that we were looking for. He has early production. He's an early declare. He went round 2 draft capital. I totally don't agree with the early declare being a proxy for draft capital. I think it's a separate measure where otherwise, if we just took away early declare status, it wouldn't have any additional signal beyond draft capital. But it definitely does have a lot of signal beyond draft capital. John, that is wrong. The data would say that is wrong. Early declare wide receiver prospects just do better than senior declare prospects. And it's not a matter
better.
But it's not a matter of
right, because it's a proxy for draft capital.
No,
and 1-year wonders are stupid. Yeah,
but it's not just a proxy for draft capital. You can to some extent. I'm a little
contrast it to wide receivers who had round 2 grades but stayed an extra year versus early declares who had a round 2 grade. They're going to be the same player every single time.
But so we can kind of go back and retrofit and guess who.
Because otherwise it's just the 1-year wonders, but the 1-year wonders suck.
No, it's not just 1-year wonders. No, it's not just the 1-year wonders. The senior declare.
He had a day 3 grade. Of course he stays in school.
No, stop spreading fake news. Senior declare round 1 players who produce early fucking suck. They all suck.
You're red as a tomato right now.
Yeah, because you're interrupting me while I'm trying to make a point. The data on non-early declare senior wide receivers drafted in round 1, regardless of production profile, is incredibly damning. Maybe Devonta Smith and Brandon Ayuk and Chris Olave are going to usher in a new age of success stories, but it hasn't been successful. Yes, some of these wide receivers who get drafted, especially in round 2 and round 3, that are these seniors who never did shit until their last year. Those guys are drawing totally dead. But it's not just that. Even if we isolate for breakout year, and if we isolate for, John, that's a bad faith. Once we isolate for breakout year, once we isolate for draft capital, early declares still outperform senior declares. They do. And so I don't think that we can just throw it out as a proxy for other things. I would also rather have early declares who produce. I don't like early declares who don't produce. They also suck. I don't love Henry Ruggs just because he was an early declare. But it's one piece of the puzzle. And on net, early declares, even after solving for draft capital, even after solving for breakout year, they do perform better in the NFL. And in particular, when we look at small school guys, which is a lot of the case for Sky Moore, why do small school guys perform worse? Because small school guys don't declare early very often, and so they aren't very good prospects. These are often, we're getting these 1-year wonder late production players, or even we've gotten some players that produce early and it's been more hit and miss. So a lot of times when we punish guys for small school, what we're really doing is punishing them for not declaring early. And Sky Moore, to me, doesn't fall into that bucket. He's in a really small bucket with Cortland Sutton and Deontay Johnson and Devontae Adams.
All right. So I think it's like a descriptive stat that can be explained by other things. And once you account for that, it's less impressive. But I'll give you this. I was talking to a source who is a very recognizable name, who told me he talked to 5 wide receiver coaches in the NFL, and all of them said the same thing. I want my team to draft Sky Moore. That's
They're
my
smart.
guy in this year's class.
They're smart. They get it.
Just dropping like
The sky is the
independent
limit.
prime source material here on the pod. We appreciate that. You're gonna. What's the chance we can get the source outed here? Like that'd be big
dude,
clutch
source
breaking.
life is so insanely difficult. I had the best source ever. What was it? 2 years ago. Best source ever. Tyler Higbee has 100 yards in each of his last 4 games. I asked a coach on the Rams, or through a friend, a coach on the Rams, is he going to be, featured in this offense? And he's like, oh, hell yeah. Tyler Higbee is going to break all the records this year. Tyler Higbee sucked. He was stuck in a committee with Gerald Everett. And it's like, I had the best source ever, and I just got so insanely burned.
Burned,
So
absolutely
I don't know how
burned.
Schefter does it. Was I lied to?
I think a lot of times what happens
Paying
with
the
sources,
money.
like, I've been saying this a lot with a lot of the beat report stuff that come out. Is like a lot of it isn't wrong information. It's just that's the correct information at a snapshot in time. And like I think that a lot of people look back on the season and they look at it as though like, how did we not always know that's how it was going to play out? But I bet you the players and coaches didn't always know that was going to always play out. Like if a beat reporter says something is the plan in July, that probably is the plan in July. That doesn't mean it's the plan in week 1. It doesn't mean it's the plan in week 10. And I just think a lot of times like plans change. Players come in, they play better, they play worse. Miles is asking if this is a Garrett Wilson versus Olave discussion. I think that actually the like early declare thing is a super interesting note on Wilson versus Olave because we talked about the idea of like all this ways that we're isolating it, right? Because a lot of it does like double up where, we're looking at what don't we want? We don't want players who don't produce early. Well, players who don't produce early often are late declares. And so those players are bad and we don't want them. And it's not that we just don't want them because they're late declares. We also don't want them because they don't produce early. I think the Wilson versus Olave thing is fascinating for a couple reasons because number one, we have like a really nice sort of sample where we can measure them directly against each other because they played on the same team, right? We never usually have something that's ever that neat and tidy where we actually had to see them play against each other. And then you have this interesting thing where they're the same age, but one of them was a different year. And so one was the early declare, one was the senior, but they were both the same age. I think it's a really fascinating one. And I think it's interesting how looking at the same profile, the same people and the same thing, whatever people weight more, whether they weight breakout year more or breakout age more, or if they weight early declare or they don't really weight early declare, depending on what stats they weight more, where people land on this one. I mean, for me, I prefer Wilson, of course, based on, what I've been saying, where I'm focusing more on breakout year. I'm focusing on the early declare status, not exclusively, like John's saying, only caring about early declares. I certainly don't only care about early declares. I don't just like toss them off into a shit if they don't declare early, but I prefer them. And I think with Wilson versus Olave, it's interesting. Like I prefer Olave right now to Jameson Williams from a profile perspective, because I would rather have the guy who produced more, even though he was the late declarer. He still produced more early than Jameson Williams did. But Wilson, where I think the production profile is a lot more similar, I would rather have Wilson than Olave.
I agree with that based on early declare. So I know what Chris Olave's grade was last year, and it was a round 2 grade. And so Garrett Wilson went in round 1. Like I think you have to give him that edge in that instance.
We have another question here, Phil. I'm just enjoying the conversation purely. This is fantastic. I have a 3rd and 9th pick in Dynasty rookie in their draft. Who should I aim for? Third. At those spots for a rebuilding team from Depeche.
Third's such a crappy spot in this year's draft.
Depeche Mode.
Nice. He just needs he needs his personal Jesus right here, Scott.
Oh God.
That is such a rough place to like pick in this year.
Yeah,
like
I was so
tough.
fortunate to trade out of the 3rd spot, and it's I think there's like 5 guys that are
I think
acceptable 103. For me, it would still be
who do you think goes 101, 102 then? It's Breece Hall
and London.
And London. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the record,
I
if
want
Paul
to
or
say
London was there at 103, I would sprint to the podium.
I
Right.
want to say I want to take Walker just because I want the running back position for the Seahawks right now. I've been doing this in redraft. I never like stacking the same running back room, but with how much I think like the wide receiver 1 for the Seahawks is going to be extremely valuable this year, I've been totally fine taking late round picks and taking both Penny and Walker.
Yeah, I take neither Penny or Walker.
I think the position for the Seahawks this year, whoever is that role, is going to be so flippin' valuable for fantasy.
Come? They're like the worst team in the league.
I don't think that matters, at least in this situation. Like the wide receiving core in there is so unbelievably strong, and they want to run the ball. They want this Rashad Penny last year situation where they just keep grinding it through. And maybe Penny doesn't hold up to that, but they want this offense to run through the running back position, which they've shown every year with them wanting to be this run first offense, despite having 3 of the best offensive weapons in the league in their passing offense.
See, I agree they want that. I don't think they're going to be able to do that because I think they're going to get the doors beat off of them every game. And like, I just don't know how you can. I'm sure their rushing rate will be super high in the first quarter, the second quarter. I just don't know you're going to get any running back production out of a backfield where neither of those guys play passing downs. And I get they want to establish the run. I just think if their over-under is like 5.5 on the win total. I'm just not sure they run enough plays and they run enough rushing plays with score effects that you're going to be able to get much there. But I wouldn't let that like ruin my dynasty take. I would take Wilson or Burks, but I'm fine with Walker too.
Yeah, I'm hedging against that. I just think that offense is going to give so much to the running back position. Whoever has that, I think is going to be valuable.
I think you could pretty easily find an RB needy team to trade down with, and I think that's probably just
that's the best option.
If you're looking at 9, my favorite pick in that spot is actually Sky Moore. That's my favorite one at 1.9. Yeah, that's the ideal pick for me at that spot. At 103, it's dirty, bro. I mean, close your eyes and take your favorite of four people.
Yeah. I'll say this to you at the 103. Like we had our draft that Tom and I were both in, our home league draft, and I originally had the 103. I was able to trade out of the 103, and I was able to get the same guy at 107. I was going to take at 103, and that being Treylon Burks.
Whoa, you're a Treylon Burks guy?
I like production, yes.
You like fraudulent production?
I don't believe in the idea of fraudulent production. I think Laviska was a strong prospect.
Oh no.
Profile. Like I'm more than happy to bet on Laviska profile 2.0. I would happily do that again. I would take Sky over James Cook. I have like no interest in James Cook.
Interesting.
Will you take Treylon over Sky?
Oh yeah, for sure. Oof. I would take Treylon.
Scott, we're gonna have to have an episode 3. Like we're gonna have to have Boot and Rally 3.
So where are you at here preseason? Where are you at on these rookie receivers? For me, it's London is 1, and to me he's like in a clear little one-person tier. And then I have Wilson and Burks kind of like tied. I slightly prefer Wilson. And then I would go. Then my next tier would be Sky, Olave, and Jameson and Pickens, and probably in that order.
All right. So I really don't hate Treylon Burks. I had him.
You hate him. You hate him personally. He personally offends you.
I had him pre-draft as my wide receiver 5. But I said all throughout my analysis pre-draft, listen, this is a very highly volatile wide receiver, very fraudulent production profile, very risky. He's not going to do much year 1. He's going to be slow to develop. He's going to be very landing spot and scheme dependent. And I think he's a massive disappointment. He's deemed a bust this time next year. And then he starts to come into his own. But yeah, I mean, it's really not looking good. Every single day, seemingly, Mike Vrabel has there's a video of him. He's asked about Treylon Burks. And he's like, yeah, Burks needs to stay on the field. He needs to study. Also, the post-draft press conference was bizarre. So they brought him up on stage, which I've never seen before. And I felt like they were just using him as a human shield because they just traded away AJ Brown. And he was the vibe. he was insanely honest, insanely accountable, insanely forthcoming. I fell in love with him. I thought he was like such a sweetheart, where he was like, yeah, I lied to the team in the combine interview. I just wasn't myself. I wasn't telling the truth. And then luckily they brought me into this and to visit with the camp. And I really hit it off with them. And they were like, yeah, he was insanely accountable. And then he showed up to camp day one fat, like an asthmatic, and like nothing about his preseason has been good at all. He might just be a liar. He might just be like lazy off the field. I don't know.
You think he kills hogs?
I mean, he kills hogs.
Yeah.
But like again, Vrabel hates him. Vrabel's quote was like, he kills hogs, but this slot wide receiver we took in round 7 kills rabbits with a
oh my gosh,
with a knife. Like he's just like he's so quick and fast and like, dude. So like the vibe.
Lucas, I know Scott's answer to this, but if you can, I talk about a little bit about what you meant by how his production is fraudulent.
Yeah, so it's a number of things. Like when I first dug into my stuff, I was like, oh, Treylon Burks has to be the unanimous wide receiver 1. And then it's like, oh, wow, he led in yards after the catch per reception. Okay, all of that came on 3 plays. And like that's the one thing he was drafted for is like, oh, that GPS MPH time was sick. And it was sick, but that was what he did well. Also, like I found the tape really problematic. And then it was like another number of things where like all he produced on were go routes and screens, and like screens are super problematic. He like never beat cornerbacks one-on-one in coverage, which you really want to see. And it was just like a million things like that where it's like, okay, I think this guy, like the numbers are crazy, and like everything you could point to that matters, like he smashes that. But like I just found so many holes and flaws that it concerned me. I lined it up against Laviska Shenault, and it was so much of the same thing. And so I would happily take George Pickens well ahead of him, and a lot of other wide receivers. Jahan Dotson probably.
Oh my god, that's
my gosh.
So I'm such a Burks. Like I've generally been like pretty like Switzerland on Burks, because there's like a lot of people on Twitter who ardently it's like Burks is the wide receiver 1, Burks the wide receiver 1, and I'm not there. He's been my wide receiver 3, although like I am just a razor edge behind Garrett Wilson. But yeah, when I hear stuff like Pickens and Dotson, that's a bridge too far. Like the same reasons that you are mentioning are why he's not my wide receiver 1, because just purely on production, like purely if I never watched him play, if I only looked at the sheet, he would be the wide receiver 1 in the class for me. His production profile is the best. But I do have those concerns about, like, can he play wide receiver in the NFL? And I guess where I draw the line is that I look at London and I look at Wilson as the ones who have at least a comparable production profile. And for me, I look at them and I'm like, all right, I'm going to break ties towards the guys who played wide receiver in a more traditional way. Although I just can't take guys like Pickens who had like 1 year of production. Granted, it was an early year of production, so that's awesome, but who has a way more limited production profile. Dotson, who was a late breakout, late declare. I can't take those guys over Burks. It's just I can't do it. I think it would just invalidate a lot of the predictiveness of production profiles, which isn't everything, but it's still a lot for me. It carries a lot of weight.
Well, the weird thing for Burks was like I said, like just by box score stats, I don't know how he wasn't the unanimous wide receiver 1 by any model. My model didn't love him. My model had him wide receiver 5, which like I still don't even know why that happened. And then like everything else I pointed to like makes me really, so he is wide receiver 1, wide receiver 5. And then everything I just talked about wasn't factored in. Like that's legitimately scary to me. Jahan Dotson was my wide receiver 7. The model really didn't love him for a number of reasons. Right. But I started warming to him late in the process because my guy Wes Huber, who's like one of the best film guys in the game, he was like, Amon-Ra St. Brown should be a round 1 pick. He's amazing. Like every single time he's had a take on a wide receiver the past 3 years, it couldn't have been more perfect. And he was saying Jahan Dotson, the thing with him is the quarterback play was like the worst I've ever seen. And so like I dug into I might have bumped him up from like wide receiver 8 to wide receiver 7, but like digging into the numbers. So he was identical to Chris Olave in separation rate. They were both top 5. The difference was like only 33% of his targets were deemed catchable by PFF versus Olave's were like 80%.
Yeah.
And there was only like a 7% difference in yards per target. And so the crazy thing with that is Ron Rivera basically said the exact same thing in the post-draft press conference where he was like, listen, I don't want to trash this quarterback they got there. I'm not that kind of guy. I don't want to. But he was like, he had a deep sigh. He was, well, listen, this kid was terrible, but Dotson was still awesome. And so like I have competition score and that like factors into my rankings, but like that really made a massive difference to the profile. And then like you look at Washington and it's like, well, Carson Wentz isn't good. Like Carson Wentz sucks. And every beat writer is saying, oh, Wentz has an unreal rapport with Jahan Dotson. That's his favorite target. And so I don't know what to do with him. He's must draft for me in redraft. I think he like.
Yeah, I agree with that. He's my most drafted player in all of best ball. Now a lot of that, granted.
Yes, dude, I love we're lockstep on that.
A lot of that is pre-draft because Dotson was going in like round 18 when these tournaments first.
Yes.
Launched. And yet his over under on the draft was 32.5. So he's basically a coin flip to be drafted round 1. And I was like, man, I don't particularly love this profile, but it's not bad. Like, it wasn't like a profile I was like, it's bad. I was like, it's just kind of eh. But I was like, if he's going to go round 1, like he's going to be drafted a lot higher than this. So I had like 50% of him, I think, in the big board. And then he's still my highest drafted overall because the market's never caught up. And he's one of the few rookie wide receivers that we can say for sure is starting full-time role, 2 wide receiver sets day 1. So I'm really in on him in redraft. He's a must draft for me in FFPC, a must draft for me in best ball. And in Dynasty, I didn't think I'd have a lot. I actually have a lot because his price is like really low. And I was able to draft him a decent amount, like the 2-1, the 2-2. And he's my 110. So I'm more than happy to draft him at cost.
Dotson and Rondale Moore are my 2 favorite picks to lead the waiver wire, like in Fab after week 1. Like just in terms of that's who everyone's screaming. Like every fantasy podcast is like, you got to go to your waiver wire right now and put in your claims for these 2 players.
I feel like Dotson and Rondale Moore got the same kind of treatment. Like Dotson post draft, there were so many, and there was a brief time you could get him outside of the first round, 201, 2-2, and that's where I got the most exposure that I have to him. I didn't want to touch him when he was hitting that 1-8, 1-9. I like Burks a little bit more than those guys personally, but I feel like they kind of got the same treatment post draft. It's very odd.
Yeah.
Hey, Jacob, can I ask you, I don't remember if we talked about this last time, but Justin Ross was like must draft for me as like the ideal upside wins championships pick in rookie drafts. And per sources, really good source, Kansas City loves him. They're excited about his future. Where did you end up on him?
I didn't have any interest because he wasn't going to get drafted high. So I just, like, by all accounts, his draft capital was going to be non-existent, and then it was non-existent. So I wasn't drafting him. But I don't I guess that's the different, I don't draft to like try and predict draft capital anyway. Like I sort of come up with my pre-draft ranks. And then once draft capital hits, then I adjust those. I don't ever try to like make my ranks. I don't have a goal of making my ranks so that I don't adjust them post-draft. I fully intend to adjust them post-draft, mostly because I want to try and like identify where my stands are. Like I had a higher pre-draft grade on Romeo Doubs than Christian Watson. And so then when they go to the same team.
Did you really?
Yes. And so then when they go to the same team, I was like, oh, awesome. Like this is going to be a fantastic leverage play where like I'm going to draft a ton of Doubs. Now, to be clear, I would not rather have Doubs straight up in Dynasty over Christian Watson once the draft capital is baked in. If they had gone in the same round, I actually would have. But like I prefer Doubs' production profile to Watson's because he produced earlier and he produced at a better school. But I would rather have thought of Watson in Dynasty. I prefer Doubs at cost. And obviously, like we'll see where it goes from here. It's been a nice investment in the summer. I've been selling off some Romeo Doubs shares, but I'm keeping some just for the fun of it because I'm pretty excited for the ride.
Let's say
both in my home league, by the way. I just took both. So
let's say Justin Ross had the same projected draft capital as Sky Moore and all those guys. Where would you put him?
Like not as highly because he just wasn't like it was so much of it was baked into the freshman year.
Right. I mean that, but that's the thing. Like it was
like so kind of as well, right?
So yeah. So I was lower. not like lower than the market at large, I would say, but I was lower than most data focused people on Pickens and Ross both, just because I didn't like everybody was really excited about the year one production. And I get that. I'm also excited about that, but I felt like it really plateaued. And I just in general, I'm a little bit wary of these players who produce to a certain level and then plateau. We've seen this with Brian Edwards, seen this with Jalen Reagor. And I don't love to be all in on those types of guys. I think with Ross, like I just never really considered that he would get that much draft capital because it just seemed that with the medical, he was totally fucked. But I mean, at this point, he's free. So like, I would love to just put him on my IR, and why not? But.
So I will say that the current iteration of my model never doesn't like Brian Edwards, like never would have liked Brian Edwards, just because such a high percentage of his receiving yards came on screens in college. But one of the variables doing like really heavy lifting in my model is best season age adjusted something. And so like, I don't know if that's just a flaw in my model or if that's just important. Like, you know, where, okay, Justin Ross had this amazing first year, but that's important. I just don't know.
Yeah,
right.
I wish that we would know. Like, I feel like Ross is probably going to not do anything, and it's going to be probably because of health, not because of anything else. I hope that that's not the case. Like I said, I mean, I'd be in on Ross because he's interesting and because there's very clear reasons that aren't related to his talent why he fell like massively in the draft, right? And it's health related. So for sure, like if he surfaces and he can make a roster, I'd be very interested. I'd love to put him on my IR. I already get the feeling that I'm going to regret being lower on Pickens. That's for sure. But I definitely I'm white knuckling that.
Well, processes aren't perfect. Like that's the thing. You always have to be evolved. It's a lot like playing Big Brother. The second you feel completely comfortable with what's going on around you, the second you get absolutely slapped in the face. We're right up against the time. Because Jacob, you have to get out of here. We know that. So Scott, again, I want to thank you, man. If you have any final thoughts, floor is yours. What you have coming out. I know, like you said, you are busy right up until the Super Bowl, but we will have to get a Boot and Rally Part 3.
Yeah, man. I don't know. I thought we were going to do 3 hours again. I'm a little disappointed.
Yeah, blame Jacob.
You three can stay on. I got to run. If you three want to stay on, I will not stop you.
Do it up. We can do it. Billy, what do you got for time?
I got a bedtime coming, y'all.
Okay.
I'm on the doctoral study path.
Oh yeah, Mr.
Leave
PhD
him wanting
over there.
more. That's good. There you go.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, I'm gonna harass you till we get a Boot and Rally 3. Final thoughts. Show today. Anything happening in the last couple of days? You let the people know.
Does anyone like Velus Jones?
No, go away, Lucas. You volunteer homer. Yeah, let us know what's going on. Your final thoughts here, man.
Is Velus Jones actually older than Joe Mixon?
No, but it's closer than you think.
Yes.
He is older than N'Keal Harry.
96 stats comes out in a few days,
awesome.
Probably working on it now, and that's about it.
I love that, Scott, you were gracious enough to join us in the middle of writing an article like that. That is just absolutely top tier. I'm
on suicide watch right now. It's rough. It's rough.
Well, I'm glad we're here for you. That's for sure. Billy,
it was a nice break in between the monotony.
I love that, man. Big Billy, final thoughts before we get out of here.
Yeah, I finally managed to get a Twitch stream going. So if any of y'all play chess, I'll be tweeting out my link and y'all can come beat me a couple times.
You're such a PhD, man. Like you're such a PhD, man.
It's disappointing to be such a stereotype.
Jacob, final thoughts.
Man, first of all, Scott, thanks so much for coming on. You're one of my absolute favorite people to talk ball with, and I love it because I love the way you think of the game really inventively, and you always get like a super unique perspective whenever I get a chance to chat with you. So awesome having you come on. In terms of stuff I'm working on, it's a busy time. I released my final best ball article of the year that was also like kind of halfway a managed tournament article with Best Ball Strategy Guide Part 3 that came out. It's pinned at the top of my Twitter. We talked about all that stacking stuff. My next article that will come out will be previewing my weekly column for Player Profiler, which is going to be the Hitchhiker's Guide to Running Back. We're going to talk all about how to successfully navigate zero or hero RB teams. And then we're going to go through and stream running backs off of deep bench formats, off of waivers week to week. And we're going to try and beat the RB12 with streaming each week. And then I'm going to be hosting the Big Tilt as a weekly show as well with Chase Vernon on the Player Profiler Roto Underworld Network coming up this fall. So excited for all that great stuff. Excited for the season, and so excited to see some takes become reality. Excited to get trolled by Scott when Sky Moore inevitably plays like a percentage of his snaps that's lower than his number in the first couple of weeks. But I imagine we'll be scaling that up as the season goes on.
No, I love it. And look, you can catch up tomorrow night. We have it doesn't stop for us week round. We had tomorrow night, Thursday, we have the Full Tilt Devy pod. We're going to talk about week 0. That's finally, like, we have college football to talk about. Andy Starr and John are going to talk about that tomorrow. Saturday, we have the fantasy walkabout, talking about all the cuts, the roster moves. It's just nonstop. Of course, if you haven't played Underdog yet, use promo code Full Tilt. They'll match you up to $100. That's 4 free entries into Best Ball Mania 3. Oh my gosh. And I just want to reiterate, Scott, absolutely phenomenal. Can't wait to read more of your work coming out. I am on that Fantasy Points site probably more than I rightfully should be, especially when I'm working, and everyone listening should be heading over there now, subscribing and doing your work. Of course, like and subscribe, leave a comment wherever you're listening. I don't care what you say. Tell me that my hat smells funny. I don't care. As long as it's there, helps drive us up the charts. We appreciate you for that. Remember, be kind on the internet. There are people on the other side of your screens. I think that's something that gets lost often, especially if you're on the hellscape that is Twitter. So try not to be a giant piece of shit on the internet. Remember that clear eyes and full hearts can never lose your best days. Well, goddamn, they're always spent tilting. Good night, everyone.